I recall a friend dying when I was in my 20s. He was an older friend, a mentor and a teacher, and I remember being in Largs of all places, and then the tears and the grieving just coming out. I remember it with some force because in my childhood, for complicated reasons, I decided that I wouldn't cry at things, and this grief was a bit delayed, but it came. There is a time to grieve and a time to mourn. This week marks a year since the lockdown started. The first of these Bothy Text podcasts was uploaded from here in Lynn Park, and shortly after it I met with another friend who has since died through COVID. This was the last day a year ago that I saw him physically. And this word of Jesus has stopped me for a moment and given space to think over this last year. The phrase he uses, "Now is your time of grief." That's what's sticking for me for this moment. The rest of the line I'll reflect on for Sunday. But this week, and with the prospect of change coming in the way that we can be with one another again, this phrase of Jesus stopped me, gave me space to look at the grief of this last year. When I set out the approach to these Bothy texts, the thought I had in my head, which I spoke of in the first podcast on the 18th of March 2020, lay with the Craigallon fire in Strathblane, of people gathering around a flame that did not go out but always sustained, and gave a moment of being together for people travelling down from the hills, from the mountains, and travelling up to them. They gathered and shared their stories around the fire, the wisdom and the joy and the hope of what they were experiencing. And I've tried to keep that picture always, week on week. And again, in passing, if you like sending anything through to me as you gather around the text, I'd love to receive it. But I've consciously spent time with that picture this morning in preparing, because this phrase of Jesus seems to matter for this kind of gathering together now. When I sit with this word, it feels like a sharing around a fire. Grief, a word about knowing the time we are in. Now is your time of grief. And then to let the chat go where it will, alongside the fire. There is grief to be borne as we find our way back together. There are things lost, friends who are now with the Lord and who we will not gather with again before the wonder and the glory of Revelation 21. These words of Jesus give us the space to grieve over this and other things that have taken place. That word in Ecclesiastes is so helpful in these moments. A word that speaks of a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. Such wisdom to gather with around a fire together. Sometimes we can run too quickly to the resurrection as a mask to the pain of now. But to my mind, the resurrection gives us the space, as Jesus does here, to speak of our crosses, our feelings of abandonment, our fear, our feelings of lostness and isolation, and yet still to know that we're held. That to me is what Jesus is doing here with the disciples, about knowing the time we are in, of grieving, of allowing those emotions space before speaking of the joy that is coming. Amen.